Men flatter themselves with the illusion of control. They believe they govern desire, when in truth desire governs them. A man may command an army, build empires, or preach laws, yet all of it is but the mask of a deeper force, the hunger that stirs in his blood, the fire that whispers in his dreams. It is desire that bends kings and slaves alike, binding them to the same chain. History, when stripped of its polished lies, is nothing but the tale of men and women moved by eros, the raw energy of longing, of lust, of ambition dressed in the language of love. What wars have been fought for freedom that were not, beneath the banners, struggles for possession? What crowns were claimed without the heat of desire pushing the hand forward? The Greeks knew this well. They did not hide eros in shame. They called it divine. To them, it was not a sin but a god, a winged child with arrows sharper than any spear. For when desire struck, men became irrational, reckless, even heroic. Helen of Troy, they said, was the face that launched 1,000 ships. But think carefully. Was it honor that sent kings into battle, or was it lust disguised as duty? Armies did not march for justice. They marched for beauty, for possession, for the fever that consumes the mind once desire takes hold. The Romans, more practical, made no attempt to deny this force. Their emperors paraded mistresses, their poets sang of forbidden pleasures, their generals carried lovers into campaign tents. Rome was not simply a machine of discipline. It was a city intoxicated by eros. Cleopatra knew this. She seduced not one empire, but two. Caesar and Antony were not conquered on the battlefield, but in the bedchamber. That is the truest form of power. Not to strike fear, but to awaken desire so strong that reason collapses. Machiavelli himself would later write, "It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." But those words carry a shadow truth. To be desired is greater than either. Fear makes men obey, love makes men loyal, but desire makes them enslaved willingly. A prince who rules through fear must always watch for rebellion. But the one who rules through desire has no need for chains. The people forge their own. And so, from the beginning of civilization, desire has been the hidden architect. Temples rose not only to gods, but to the beauty of the human form. Statues of naked athletes, frescoes of lovers entwined. Proof that societies did not build monuments from reason alone, but from the intoxication of eros. You believe history is written by strategy, by law, by cold calculation? Number. History is written by the restless energy of desire, unacknowledged yet undeniable. The Greeks sang it as myth. The Romans wielded it as power. And every man who thought himself master of destiny was, in truth, a servant to this invisible tyrant. And so we arrive at the darkest truth. Sex is not an indulgence. It is the key. Not because the act itself rules the world, but because the energy behind it, the raw current of longing, controls the mind. Until a man faces it, he is its prisoner. And until a people face it, their history is nothing more than the theater of their ungoverned desire. If the Greeks celebrated desire as divine, and the Romans wielded it as power, then Christianity sought to chain it. The church looked upon eros not as a god, but as a serpent. Seductive, dangerous, the whisper that tempted Adam and Eve in the garden. It is no coincidence that the first sin in their holy book begins with desire. Not murder, not theft, not war, but the hunger to taste forbidden fruit. It was not the apple that damned mankind, but the longing. Desire was painted as the root of all corruption. From this moment, history took a darker turn, for religion became not just a worship of God, but a war against man's own instincts. Priests declared the body an enemy of the soul. Pleasure was rebranded as sin, and repression became the foundation of morality. But repression is never victory. When you chain desire, it does not disappear. It grows restless in the dark, twisting, turning, waiting for release. And so the church found itself haunted by the very hunger it condemned. Monasteries whispered with scandals. priests broke vows in shadows. And the more harshly society condemned the flesh, the more feverishly men dreamed of it. Medieval Europe was filled with contradictions. On Sundays, priests thundered against lust, warning that it led to damnation. But walk through the streets of Florence, Venice, or Paris, and desire was everywhere, in paintings and poems, in secret brothels, visited by the same nobles who knelt in cathedrals. The church preached repression, yet the Renaissance painted naked gods and goddesses with a freedom that mocked sermons. This is the psychology of repression. What is forbidden becomes irresistible. What you fear to name in daylight becomes the obsession of your dreams. And so, instead of conquering Eros, religion made it more powerful. Consider the witch hunts. Tens of thousands of women burned, accused of lust with the devil. But what truly fueled these fires? Was it faith, or was it fear of desire? Men projected their own cravings onto women, then destroyed them to escape their own shadows. The witch was not a demon. She was the embodiment of repressed longing. Desire became dangerous because it could not be admitted, and when men deny their hunger, they become its slaves. This is why Machiavelli wrote with cold clarity, "Men are more apt to be moved by the things which seem than by those which are." Religion turned desire into a mask of fear and shame, but behind that mask it ruled even more absolutely.
By condemning Eros, the church believed it was defending morality. In truth, it was making men hypocrites, torn between piety in public and indulgence in secret. And hypocrisy, as every prince knows, is the greatest weakness of any state. A society that cannot face its desires will eventually be ruled by them. Thus, the Middle Ages were not an age of purity. They were an age of repression, of tension, of shadows. And in those shadows, desire became even more cunning, even more dangerous. It was no longer worshipped openly as in Greece, or paraded as in Rome. It became hidden, and therefore unstoppable. For what man hides in shame, he cannot master. And what he cannot master will one day master him. Desire is not only in the bedchamber. It sits at the council table. It whispers in the king's ear. It decides the fate of empires. For every prince, every ruler must learn this truth. Men are not governed by reason, but by longing. And the wisest leaders are those who know how to wield it. Machiavelli himself wrote with brutal clarity, "Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear." But look deeper, and you see that both love and fear are only faces of desire. The desire to be cherished, the desire to be safe, the desire to dominate, the desire to escape death. The art of ruling, then, is the art of mastering human hunger. History offers countless lessons. Think of Cleopatra. Was it her armies that bent Rome to her will? No. It was her power to inflame the desires of men who commanded armies. Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, both fell not to swords, but to longing. Cleopatra understood a secret that armies forget. A single woman who can master desire may hold more power than a legion of steel. Consider too the Borgias of Renaissance Italy. Pope Alexander VI and his infamous children Cesare and Lucrezia. Their court was a theater of lust and ambition. Alliances were forged in marriage beds. Poison and passion walked hand in hand. To outsiders, their scandals seemed weakness. Yet for years, the Borgias ruled because they understood that desire was the currency of power, and they traded it ruthlessly. Desire governs not only rulers, but the ruled. A prince who promises bread may keep his people alive, but a prince who promises glory, wealth, and beauty, he owns their souls. The Roman emperors knew this well. Bread and circuses, yes, but also parades of triumph, baths of marble, theaters filled with songs and sensual delight. To rule men's desires is to rule men entirely. But here lies the paradox. The same force that strengthens a throne can also destroy it. Louis XIV, the Sun King, bathed his court in opulence and desire. Versailles was a palace of spectacle, where every ritual fed the hunger for status, beauty, and seduction. It bound the nobles to him in awe, but his heirs, blind to the danger, drowned in luxury. Desire that once secured the crown became decadence, and decadence bred revolution. This is the psychology of politics. Desire is never neutral. It must be directed, channeled, mastered. A wise ruler, Machiavelli warns, must appear virtuous, but secretly learn how to manipulate men's appetites. Give them an object of longing, and you may lead them anywhere. Deny them all, and they will turn on you with rage. For politics is not merely the struggle for power. It is the theater of desire. Kings, queens, princes, presidents, they are not only rulers of laws. They are seducers of nations. And so, when Machiavelli wrote The Prince, he spoke less of swords than of symbols. For a sword can kill a man, but a symbol can command generations. Desire is the key that unlocks obedience, loyalty, even sacrifice. And he who holds that key commands history itself. But beware, for the same key that opens the palace door can also open the dungeon a ruin. Those who play with desire too recklessly, whether kings, priests, or lovers, often find themselves consumed by the very fire they sought to control. The 17th and 18th centuries called themselves the Age of Reason. Philosophers proclaimed that light had finally conquered darkness, that logic would rule where superstition and passion once reigned. They dreamed of societies guided by rational laws, free of the chaos of hunger, lust, and blind faith. But Machiavelli would smirk at such confidence. For no matter how brightly the Enlightenment burned, the shadows of desire never disappeared. Take René Descartes, who declared, "I think, therefore I am." He placed reason at the center of existence. Yet even Descartes could not escape the passions of the soul. He wrote of how emotions cloud judgment, how desire bends a mind. His philosophy may have crowned thought king, but desire still lurked as the shadow monarch. Or consider Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who spoke of liberty, equality, and the natural goodness of man. But in his Confessions, he revealed his own cravings, fetishes, and contradictions. His public voice declared reason and virtue, but his private soul was haunted by desires that reason could never tame. This was the great hypocrisy of the Enlightenment. Its thinkers preached control, discipline, rationality, yet their own lives betrayed the same appetites they sought to suppress. Behind every rational philosophy, desire waited, like a prisoner scratching at the walls of its cell. And what of kings and queens who claimed to embody this age of reason? Catherine the Great of Russia styled herself a philosopher queen, a ruler enlightened by Voltaire and Montesquieu. Yet her court was infamous for its intrigues. Her private life ruled as much by passion as by policy. Desire made and unmade her alliances. Her empire was vast, but her heart was restless, a reminder that even an empress could not silence the whisper of longing. Louis XVI of France, tutored in rational governance, sought order and balance. But desire was not on his side. The people's hunger for bread, for dignity, for freedom, erupted in revolution. And his queen, Marie Antoinette, became a symbol not of reason, but of excess desire, of luxury turned into decadence. Versailles, that temple of spectacle, collapsed under the weight of its own illusions. The Enlightenment believed it had finally mastered human nature, but then came the French Revolution. The streets of Paris filled not with philosophers, but with mobs, driven not by reason, but by fury, envy, and desire for vengeance. Heads fell beneath the guillotine, not because of rational debate, but because desire, the hunger for justice, the rage of repression, demanded blood. The so-called Age of Reason revealed the oldest truth. Desire cannot be abolished. It can be masked, dressed in fine words, clothed in philosophy. But beneath the powdered wigs and marble halls, men and women were still creatures of longing, still governed by forces they could neither see nor master. And so Machiavelli's shadow lingered, for he knew that to speak of reason without desire is to speak of a crown without a head. Power is not guided by ideas alone. It is driven by passions beneath them. The Enlightenment believed it had finally mastered human nature, but then came the French Revolution. The streets of Paris filled not with philosophers, but with mobs, driven not by reason, but by fury, envy, and desire for vengeance. Heads fell beneath the guillotine, not because of rational debate, but because desire, the hunger for justice, the rage of repression, demanded blood. The so-called Age of Reason revealed the oldest truth. Desire cannot be abolished. It can be masked, dressed in fine words, clothed in philosophy. But beneath the powdered wigs and marble halls, men and women were still creatures of longing, still governed by forces they could neither see nor master. And so Machiavelli's shadow lingered, for he knew that to speak of reason without desire is to speak of a crown without a head. Power is not guided by ideas alone. It is driven by passions beneath them. The Enlightenment promised mastery. In truth, it only gave us a new illusion, that logic could chain the unconscious, that reason could silence the heart. But history marched forward, and each revolution, each empire, each fall of kings would prove the same lesson. The 19th century was an age of iron and smoke, of factories rising like temples, of nations forging identities with fire and steel. It was an age that proclaimed progress, science, and the triumph of human reason over the chaos of nature. Yet beneath the clamor of machines, the pulse of desire still beat louder than any engine. Industry was built on hunger. Hunger for wealth, for empire, for domination of nature itself. The great tycoons of Britain and America clothed their ambition in the language of progress. But at its root was desire, insatiable, restless, consuming. Workers slaved not merely to produce goods, but to feed the appetites of the ruling class. The new factories became altars where human longing was sacrificed to the gods of profit and power. But industry was not the only revolution. Nations themselves were reborn through desire. Across Europe, peoples yearned for identity. Italians under Austrian rule, Germans divided into petty states, Poles erased from the map. Nationalism was not born of reasoned debate in parliaments. It was born of passion, of deep unconscious cravings for belonging, for recognition, for the warmth of a tribe. Flags became symbols of desire, not logic. Blood was spilled not for policies, but for dreams. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte. He rose not through reason alone, but because he embodied desire itself. He was the people's hunger for glory, their longing for a father, their craving for destiny. His empire stretched across Europe not because it was rational, but because he inflamed unconscious drives, pride, envy, vengeance. When he crowned himself emperor, it was not logic that placed the crown, but desire disguised as destiny. And when he fell, it was because desire, the desire of nations to resist him, burned hotter than his own. But if politics revealed the power of desire, so too did the intimate life of individuals. The 19th century was also the century of hidden sexuality. Victorian society cloaked itself in respectability, covering its windows with heavy drapes, its words with euphemism, its art with allegory. Outwardly, it preached restraint, discipline, and morality. Inwardly, it seethed with repressed cravings. Brothels flourished in London. Romantic literature burned with barely disguised passion. The very prudishness of the Victorians was proof of the force they feared: desire. It was in this world that psychology itself was born. Thinkers like Schopenhauer declared that human life was driven not by reason, but by a blind, irrational will. The will to live, to reproduce, to dominate. To him, desire was not just a force among others. It was the very essence of existence. Nietzsche followed, proclaiming that beneath morality and law, what truly ruled mankind was the will to power, the drive for dominance, for affirmation, for creation and destruction alike. And then came Freud, staring into the depths of the unconscious. In the quiet streets of Vienna, he listened to patients whose bodies trembled with symptoms no doctor could explain. hysteria, paralysis, compulsions, all revealed what the Victorians denied: repressed sexual energy. Freud declared that civilization itself was built upon repression, and that neurosis was the price humanity paid for its own order. The unconscious, he said, was not a shadow to be ignored, but the true master of human life. The irony of the 19th century was stark. As factories belched smoke and railways cut through nations, as parliaments debated liberty and empire, humanity prided itself on its mastery of the world. And yet, desire ruled everywhere. In the rise of nations, in the passions of revolution, in the intimacy of the bedroom, and in the tremors of the unconscious. The machines may have changed, but the driver remained the same. Behind the steam engine, behind the guillotine, behind the philosopher's pen and the general's sword, there was always the same restless force. The energy of desire to desire is eternal. The 20th century was the century when desire stopped hiding in the shadows, and instead was mastered, weaponized, and unleashed on a scale humanity had never seen before. It was no longer just kings and emperors who understood the hunger of men. Now corporations, governments, dictators, and democracies alike learned to harness desire, not repress it. The unconscious was no longer a mystery, it became a tool. The man who perfected this art was not Freud himself, but his nephew, Edward Bernays. He took Freud's discoveries about the unconscious mind and translated them into a new language, public relations. He convinced women to smoke by branding cigarettes as torches of freedom. He made bacon and eggs the all-American breakfast. He sold wars, presidents, and products by appealing not to logic, but to lust, pride, envy, and fear. Bernays proved that mass psychology was not about reason. It was about tapping into the desires people denied in themselves and turning them into profit, power, and obedience. But if Bernays was the magician of capitalism, then the dictators of the 20th century were its dark priests. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, they understood what Machiavelli had whispered centuries before. Men are not ruled by truth, but by passion. Nazi propaganda did not persuade with reason. It seduced with symbols, with myth, with the erotic pull of belonging. The raised arm, the marching crowd, the ecstatic roar of millions. This was politics as desire. And it worked until the world drowned in blood. Even in the so-called free world, democracies learned to master the same techniques. Posters, radios, films, and later television, all crafted to stir unconscious cravings. Soldiers marched not only for country, but for love of the flag, for fear of shame, for the unconscious need to prove themselves men. Citizens consumed not because they needed, but because their desires were being scripted for them, day by day, advertisement by advertisement. And then came the digital age. Today, algorithms have replaced emperors. Social media platforms know more about your hidden desires than your closest lover. They feed you what you crave, amplify your fears, reward your vanity with likes, and whisper to your unconscious with a precision even Freud could not have imagined. Look around, billions of people enslaved, not by chains of iron, but by invisible chains of dopamine. Desire itself has become the marketplace, the battlefield, the currency of the 21st century. And so what have we learned? That beneath history, beneath politics, beneath the smiling mask of civilization, there's only one force that rules mankind: desire. It built empires and it destroyed them. It crowned kings and it dragged them to the guillotine. It created industry, revolution, propaganda, and digital prisons. Machiavelli told us long ago that men are driven not by virtue, but by need, hunger, and passion. Freud told us that the unconscious never sleeps. Bernays proved that if you control desire, you control the crowd. And today, the machines we built have learned the lesson better than we have. You think you are free. You think you make choices. But desire is choosing for you. Every click, every purchase, every vote, every love, guided by forces you do not see. Here is the truth. The energy of desire controls your mind until you face it. If you do not face it, someone else will. A politician, a company, an algorithm. They will whisper into your unconscious and move you like a puppet. But if you dare to confront it, if you drag your desires out of the shadows, if you master the fire instead of being consumed by it, then, and only then, can you begin to call yourself free. Because freedom is not the absence of chains. Freedom is the power to rule your own desire. High-voltage sex is the key. Desire is the lock. And only those who face it can hold the key to their own minds. If this journey stirred something within you, if it made you question the forces that pull your strings, then don't let it fade. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because every discussion sharpens the mind. Share this video with someone who dares to face the shadows within themselves. And most importantly, subscribe, not for comfort, but for truth. Because here we peel back the illusions, and the next revelation will take you even deeper into the hidden history of power, desire, and the human mind.